Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Supra Omnia. Mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. We have two guests with us today. First, Ryan Rae Harbuck. Ryan is the author of her memoir, When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Chair. This is her story, her journey, from before her paralyzing car accident to becoming a teacher, a coach, a mom, and much more. It is about self-reflection. It's about her strengths and vulnerabilities, her struggles and her victories. And it has lessons for us all. Ryan and her book have been featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, Newsweek, and many other places. We also have with us today a psychologist, Erika Kawamura. Erika has a doctorate in psychology. She's board certified in lifestyle medicine, brings over 20 years experience, and is part of the Equilibria psychological and consultation services leadership team. She provides therapy to adult clients to help them improve their well-being, lead more fulfilling lives, and work toward their personal goals. Ryan, your story has been well covered, but it seems to me that there are two to three areas that deserve to be examined in more detail. First is the concept of body image. Second is how we connect to those who are disabled or have a different body. And finally, given if time permits, how your strengths have come from vulnerabilities. So if we could just start by briefly telling us your story and then focus in on how family, friends, and students react to you in a wheelchair.
Thanks for having me, first of all. So I was in a car accident when I was 16 years old. A group of friends and I were coming back from a high school dance, and nobody quite knows exactly what happened. Everybody has very different memories and a lot of lapses from the evening itself. I always tell kids when they ask about my accident that I was really lucky, and our brains are really cool because they have the ability to shut off those really traumatic events. And so I've always really sort of felt that I had my life before and I have my life now, and they don't really intertwine and they don't really overlap. And I think that that has really helped me a ton just in terms of just moving on and getting past that piece of the accident. But so with nobody really quite understanding what happened that night, the car that I was in, there was 6 of us kids. It ended up crossing a grass median to oncoming traffic on the highway and hitting a car head on. And everybody was injured in both cars. I ended up flying out the window, and I broke through the window and flew out. Paramedics estimated that I landed about 75 feet away from the vehicle. And so that's where I sustained my spinal cord injury, which is how I became paralyzed. And so I have no movement or feeling from like mid rib cage down. And that was a very immediate thing. But beyond that, I had a lot of other traumatic events that couldn't be ignored. I had broken both my legs, both my arms. I had collapsed my lungs. I had severe road rash. And so if you can imagine like a rug burn, but from a highway. And so I had a lot of other issues that needed to be attended to, not just the fact that I had injured my spinal cord. And so, in fact, when I got to the hospital, they didn't even do surgery on my back first. They actually had to stabilize my legs because I was bleeding out a lot of blood. And so they had to stabilize that part of me before I could even go into surgery to try to repair my back. And so I was really banged up. I spent 4 months in the hospital after that. I was a junior in high school, so I missed the second semester of my junior year. Just because of the time frame that was. And then from there, it was sort of once I was well enough and out of immediate urgency, I had a ventilator breathing for me for a month. I had lost a lot of muscle mass and just had a lot of healing to do. And so once I was well enough, I think I moved into a rehab facility specific to spinal cord injuries. And that's when I really got to learn what my life would be like from the seat of a wheelchair. And it sounds really wild, but I had to take classes, wheelchair class, on how to open doors and how to put my pants on and all of these things. And I think that being as young as I was, that really spoke to me. It was like, oh, I'm in school and I'm learning things, and so I really focused on those pieces, like what could I learn today to get me to maybe get to go to the movies with my friends. And so those were the things that were really meaningful to me, and I didn't get really caught up in the pieces of why me, or why did this happen, or what does this mean for my life and my health. I really just was a naive 16-year-old that wanted to go to the mall with my friends. So how was I going to do that? And so I think that served me really well, and I was able to really just continue to live my life the way that I wanted to from that point forward.
Wow, because I was just going to say that, when something like that happens, some tragedy or life-altering event, whether it's like loss or, just anything where you feel like there's no end in sight, this is a permanent change, that it's so easy to just spiral into that, why me? This is how things should have been, or I wish things are this way. And, it's just so easy to just fall into that existing mode. So that's amazing that, you were more goal oriented in the immediate, like, I want to go see my friends. I want to go see I want to go to the mall.
Yeah. And I'm sure at some point it was a coping mechanism for me, where it was, it was easier for me to just focus on like the task at hand rather than trying to look back. And also, being a 16-year-old, you don't get caught up in those like real depressing, it's a lot harder, I think, for a kid to just really get so caught up in depression and like, what is my life going to be like, and all these like big developmental things that I think I just wasn't ready for it. So I didn't think of it that way.
All of us, though, particularly teenagers, but all of us have body image issues. About it, you see it all the time. You were a competitive swimmer. You had a swimmer's body. I mean, obviously, I haven't seen pictures of you when you were younger, other than what was in your book. But swimmers' bodies, they have very strong upper body strength from the arm motions. They have very strong legs from propelling in the water. Your legs don't have that same muscle mass any longer. So that probably created body images for you. I'm just imagining.
Absolutely. And I think that even compounding that, from all of my injuries from my accident, I ended up having to have several skin grafts on my legs, just from sliding across the pavement, I suppose. And so doctors had to take skin from my hips and replace it into parts of my lower legs. And so not only does that create different scarring, and my legs don't have like clear edges to them. They're a little draggy. And but beyond that piece of it too, because of having to replace skin with those grafts, my skin and my legs also have real decreased circulation. And so my legs get really purple and cold, and in the winter, and then in the summer they get really swollen and red and hot. And just the fact that I'm not up and moving, all of the lymph and the tissues are just stagnant and sitting. And so that's something that I learned really early on, was something that I was very aware of. And I think that I was even more so aware of it because other people were too. I said I was 16 when I got in my accident. When I got out of my accident, it was summer, and I wanted to go to the pool and be a swimmer again, like I always was. And that was when I immediately realized that people had something to say about my new body, about my legs, about how they didn't work. They were small, they were purple, they were red. And a lot of it was kids. I went from my accident, I started coaching swimming as sort of like another outlet for me to be able to do as many things as I could. And so I vividly remember coaching 6-year-old kids, and they don't have a filter, and I love that about them. But it was also a really hard lesson at 16 years old, having a kid tell me that I have really ugly legs or they're afraid of my legs. And, you know, I part of me is like, yeah, me too, but I don't know what to do about that. And so I think that being a swimmer, I think it was really hard because I had to make that choice. Am I going to keep swimming, or am I going to not? Am I going to let that take over my choices and who I want to be and what I want to be? Or am I going to have to let go of some of that? I don't even know if it's vanity, but it is vanity, to just be able to do the things that I want. And, you know, this has been almost 30 years ago, and I still, to this day, I don't own a pair of shorts. I usually wear shoes that cover my feet all the way, even if it's really hot out. And it's just because I think I've just finally made those choices that it's easier. I don't need to be reminded about my legs, about what they look like, to anyone. And I don't, you know, and I think because it's been so long, it doesn't matter to me, but it's not worth it either, if that makes any sense.
No, it totally does. And, you know, and that's such a hard thing to do, especially as a 16-year-old, you know, where it's like that decision of like, do I let other people and their judgments, you know, define me, or, you know, hide me away sort of thing, right? Or because it makes them uncomfortable.
Right.
And you picked your own happiness and your, you know, what drives you and what brings your sense of purpose in life.
Absolutely. And I actually just finished writing a novel, and the whole novel came from a spark of me realizing that so much of how I perceive myself as a wheelchair user, as somebody paralyzed, as somebody disabled, has been based off of how others perceive me. And so that was sort of like the idea behind my whole novel, just because that's something that has really stuck with me and been a part of my identity this whole time, is sort of learning that so much of how I feel has been dictated about how others feel.
How hard was it to change that sense of self-identity? I mean, I understand in high school, you know, you weren't a doctor, a construction worker, a scientist, or you're a teenager, but you were a competitive swimmer. You had hopes and dreams. You still have hopes and dreams, and you've accomplished a lot. But your identity, did your identity change? Did people impact that idea of your self-identity? Did you grow in different ways because of it? What happened there? I mean, I can imagine just being absolutely crushed, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think one thing for certain, I was pretty quiet as a kid, and pretty reserved, and I would much rather be sort of like a wallflower in a big scene. And I realized rather quickly after my accident that I was a very visible difference in a room full of kids. And so I had to learn how to be a little bit more outgoing than I kind of wanted to be. And I think just for myself, in terms of being able to talk to people and share with them, and especially let them understand that, like, I'm okay. I'm just a kid like you. You know, we have differences. We look different. But I realized, you know, very early on that it was sort of my job to be vocal enough about the fact that I'm just a normal kid. I'm just a regular teenager, and kind of show that and put that upon other people before they had the chance to make their own opinions about what or who they thought I was. And so I think that ultimately that served me really well, because I learned how to advocate for myself way back in a time where that wasn't even anything we talked about. That wasn't anything that we thought of as a big importance, but yet that was something that I had to learn how to do. And I think that all of the lessons and all of the struggles that I've had have made me a better person in the long run. And I often have the privilege of talking to kids about my disability and about my accident, and I always tell them that it was probably one of the best things that could happen to me, because it gave me such a different outlook on who I am and what I want to do, and kind of solidify a really big drive for myself that I may not have had otherwise.
When I hear that story, when I hear what you just said, the first thing that pops into my head is that obviously you must have had a very strong family support. You either had a very strong family support group, or it came from that inner strength that you might have. Which was it? Was your family? I'm sure your family was supportive in many ways, but where did that strength come from?
Oh gosh, I would say that it probably wasn't my family, and I think that for me it was survival of the fittest. It was like, are we going to grow and have a wonderful life, or are we not? And you have the choice. And I think that I just broke it down into simple parts for me at a teenage, mindset to understand. It was like, are we going to move forward, or are we going nowhere? And I'm the only one that can decide that.
So like a particular defining moment that triggered you to have that honest conversation with yourself of okay, I have to make this decision, right? And yeah, because that's something that you try to or at least I try to talk to a lot of my clients about, of we can't change what happens to us, right? But we can control how we want to respond to it by looking at how do we want to feel, how do we want to think about it, what do we want to do about it. But it sounded like that came pretty naturally to you. So I'm curious if there was a particular defining moment, or what kept you going? What kept you going all these years?
Right, I know. I can't think of one specific. There wasn't this aha moment, but perhaps it was the fact that I didn't actually have the family support that sort of do it for myself and figure it out for myself. So my accident happened my junior year, and when I graduated my senior year, I moved into an apartment by myself, and it was in a terrible neighborhood, and the apartment was so old I couldn't even fit in any of the rooms, and so the landlord took off all the doors and the door frames just so that I could fit into the bathroom and the bedroom. But in my head, that's what I had to do, and looking back, I'm like, who let me do that? but I think at the time that was something that I needed to show myself that I could do the things that I wanted to do and be independent. And
I wonder if your some of the ways that you talk about it that athlete mentality, I wonder how much that kind of played into it too, with the grit and the perseverance, the fighter and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of taking what I know about sports, and you practice something and you keep practicing it, and when it hurts, it means you're doing it well. And so kind of translating that just into my everyday life.
So you mentioned children sometimes without filters saying things to you, and it strikes me that there's this whole body of thought of how we should appropriately connect with those that are disabled. And you started by in your book, and what you mentioned is that a very young girl, I believe she was 5 years old, said to you that you have really, and it was kind of the E was very long, really ugly legs. It reminds me of a family story where a 4-year-old relative walked into an elevator as someone was coming out who had an eye patch and said, "Hi, pirate," because that's what you see in little books. And little kids just have no filter. Luckily, the guy that had the eye patch thought it was absolutely hilarious. But it has to be cutting at some point in time, or do you just let it go because they're children?
I think I know when kids have said unintentionally hurtful things, like it does sit with me, but I know that it comes from a good place. And they're curious, and if they were really afraid, they wouldn't be talking to me. And that's what I try to remember too. Just not even with children, with grown adults sometimes. And I oftentimes will see somebody and they'll say, "It's good that you're outside. Good job." And I'm like, "I'm not doing anything." But I've been in a chair for so long and I've had a disability for so long that I recognize that as not an insult to me. I recognize that as that person is trying to connect with me in the only way that they can consider a real way. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate the connection, even if it is sort of misguided or ill-timed on occasion. But I think that more than not, I understand people to be good and their intentions to be good. And I can't speak for the disability community. I can't speak for another person that uses a wheelchair or a spinal cord injury. I can't speak for anybody else. But I think that just the time that I've had on this planet, being a very visible disability within the community that I'm in, I have learned that I can be a good sort of lesson for people in terms of how to be able to communicate or relate to somebody that may be unlike themselves. And like I said, I like to talk. I go into classes all the time and I talk to kids, and I always tell them, like, this is your opportunity right now. This is a safe space for you to be able to ask questions about somebody who is different from you, and there'll be no judgment. There'll be nothing. Like you can just feel really safe about being able to talk to somebody that's different than you. And kids really they really respect that and enjoy that, and get a lot of really great questions out of them.
But from an adult perspective, would it have been better for the person that said, really great that you're outside? Would it have been just better to say, "How you doing? Great day," whatever? Or, what is there? Should they ignore the fact that you're different in some way? Would that be better?
So yeah, if I were to offer advice to people on how to deal with somebody with a disability or that is different, is in my experience, if you acknowledge the person before their disability, then that's always the best way. Even if it's just so much as like a simple sentence where you say, "Oh, Ryan, who uses a wheelchair," rather than that wheelchair user. Do you see what I mean? There's just little like changes to how you say it. And in my experience and talking to other people in the disability community, that's really what is most important, is addressing the person before their disability.
So what about other instances? I've read many other things that you've written in addition to your book. And there was a woman, who said to you that you were lucky that you weren't able to experience birthing pain, as an example. Is that good? Is that bad? I mean, it seems to me like we don't know you, and you very well may have wanted to experience have the full experience. As a guy, I want to be on drugs on too, but but you may have wanted to experience the whole thing. So was that, when someone does that, is that hurtful? Is that just inconsiderate? Is that just expressing their opinion? What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, for anything, it's very thought provoking for me, because everybody's experience is different in their lives. And so giving that example, not being able to feel childbirth, sure, like that made it really easy for me. But it also, what people don't understand is the potential complications there. And the biggest one, I've had 2 children, the biggest one is not being able to feel contractions and know that I was in labor. And both of my children were born very, very quickly and under very lucky circumstances that could have very much been gone a different way. And so yeah, sure, like that's great that I didn't feel anything, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that I didn't feel the labor, the contractions. And so I think that somebody that would say something like that to me, that I'm so lucky, I think that I have lived long enough as a wheelchair user, somebody with a disability, that I can brush it off, that their intention was not to make me feel small or inadequate in any way. But you know, that little voice inside of me that's like, yes, but you don't understand. And that's the biggest piece to it.
Right. Or like their experience is a lot different from your experience. Like maybe that person did have a really complicated, painful childbirth, whereas, it's everybody's got different experiences with that.
Right.
But yeah, but like, what do you even like, I guess like until like you've kind of found your way, so to speak, of how to navigate these things or how to reframe it in your mind of like, okay, they're just kids or they're coming from a good place, right? Like initially, I can imagine like that gut reaction where you just want to like yell at them, right? Or maybe say something back at them and do a dig back at them, or maybe you're not that kind of person, but I guess like, what do you say to that, right? It's kind of like, okay, yeah, and your point is, right? Like you kind of feel like, okay, what do right? Like when they make these observational things, it's like, okay, like what do you say?
I think in my younger years, I would be more apt to try to say something to show them how I really felt or to set them straight. But I think that as I get older, it usually doesn't serve me to try to correct my perception of how I feel onto them. And so for the most part, I think I even like block out people misbehaving, as I would say, like in terms of, like I'll go somewhere with my family and somebody will be parked in a handicapped spot sideways or something, and I don't even notice it. But then my husband, my kids, everybody is like on top of that. Like, why would somebody do that? And I didn't even notice it to begin with. And so I think on some level is like, as you live your life and the longer that you have this identity, you have to sort of dissociate just a little bit so that it doesn't consume you entirely.
That's an important point. I worked with a guy one time. His wife had MS, if I'm not mistaken, and there were many times when she would walk perfectly, everything would be fine, and then all of a sudden she wouldn't. And so they had a handicap card, and they'd park in the handicap spot at the mall or whatever. And they always felt like people were looking at them, like here's 2 able-bodied people with a handicap card. His point was, yeah, but you never know when she's halfway in the mall and then can't walk anymore. And then, dragging her out. At least I'd be able to drag her only outside of the door to get to the car. So sometimes we don't really understand what's going on there.
I would say 100% of the time, I would much rather have a visible disability than an invisible disability, because at least like, people are going to make their own perceptions of me based on just seeing me, but they know that there's something that I'm going to struggle with or be challenged with from the get-go. And I don't need to hide that from anybody. And I think that I find that people that have invisible disabilities are constantly trying to fight for their own existence because people don't see their challenges.
That's an excellent point. Knew somebody that had traumatic brain injury, and you don't know. You look at them; they're normal, if you will. They look just like anybody else. They're walking, talking, et cetera, et cetera. But they were given to anger, and so most people would go like, "What's wrong with you?" Well, what's wrong is that they had traumatic brain injury and they can't control certain things, and they needed quiet spaces many times, and they needed to be out of certain situations. So it was actually very much experience because it wasn't visible, head or whatever. So I think that's an excellent point that you made there.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk to us about you'd mentioned strengths that have come out of the vulnerabilities. Talk to us about that.
So when I was writing my book, when I was editing my book, I didn't realize it when I was writing it. When I was editing my book, I realized that pretty much every lesson or every experience that I had that I was putting in there all had this notion of the fact that I would reach these very, very vulnerable parts of my life or pieces of who I am. And those were the times that I really challenged myself to my core to become stronger, or to just recognize that I had the strength within me from in the first place. And I think that it wasn't until actually sitting down to write the back blurb of my book that I really kind of put it and pieced it all together, that's how I've lived this entire time, and how meaningful it has been, and how important it is for me to be able to embrace that notion of being vulnerable and that rawness of it. And it's you always think of being vulnerable as being weak or being not good enough, and just being able to break it down to the bones of it, and realizing who you really are at your core, I think makes you stronger than anybody can fake it.
So when you think about strengths, when I think about strengths from vulnerabilities, there's comic book myth, and then there's the reality that happened to you. So comic book myth is, I can't see, so therefore I should be able to hear better than other people, which of course is not true. My father couldn't see, so I happen to know that for a fact, but that's besides the point. What are some of those strengths that you think that you ultimately ended up developing that may not have been developed from your pre-16-year-old self?
I mean, I think that my willingness to try and to put my effort into things was something that I didn't have as a teenager. And I've written about this a lot, where as a teenager, I was a swimmer and I just kind of skated by, and I could have been really good, but I was worried that I could be good, so I wasn't very good, and all of these things. And then once I really came to terms with those things, I wanted to try. And even though that my body was different and my swimming was different, I had just come out, this was in my mid to late 20s, I had just come off of a big 8-month-long bed rest where I was very, very ill for a very long time. And I started sort of coping by dreaming about swimming. And I spent a lot of time dreaming about swimming. And so once I was well enough to get out of bed, I don't think I was medically deemed well enough, but once I thought I was well enough, I started to swim again, and I started to train. And really early on in that time was when I made just kind of like a silent promise to myself that I'm going to put all of my effort into this thing, and I'm just going to see what happens, because I never let myself do it in the past. I'm 30 years old now, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to sort of like show the world what happens when you try really, really hard. And at the time I was a teacher. And so I kind of used it as a lesson for some of my students. I was getting up at like 3:30 in the morning just so that I could get my training done before I went and taught a full day. And I was paying gobs of money to go to all these swim meets all around the US because there aren't any local para swim meets. And I just really wanted to see what would happen if I put in all of my effort. And that is something that I think would not have happened had I not had my accident. Would I not have realized that I wasn't living up to my potential as a kid? Having things taken away from you so often opens those doors to the things that you didn't know existed for yourself. And just kind of being braver than I knew, I think, is something that has kind of kept me going this whole time.
So let's talk about coping skills, because you mentioned that. And Erika, I know that you train people in coping skills all the time. But Ryan, when I read your book, I didn't ever read a single page where you said, I'm going to have a glass of wine or a bottle of wine or a scotch or a beer, whatever. So alcohol would have been a very easy way to self-medicate and cope, right?
Or painkillers, right? I'm imagining, just the way you were describing your injury in the early on at the beginning of the podcast. I'm thinking, wow, painkillers would have been
an obvious choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where did you get your coping skills from?
That's a great question. I honestly, I don't know. I think that I said that I was young. I was 16. And so the coping was a day-to-day thing. It was, how do I do this today? And keeping it in small bites. And I think by the time I was old enough to realize that I could have self-medicated my, all these years, I think that it was like, but for what? And I think I've said this a couple times, like it just didn't serve me. And I learned that I don't have time for or energy for things that are not going to serve me to live this life that I've been given.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, because I think that staying present, like it sounded like you were just really staying present, in the day to day. Because a lot of people who struggle with anxiety are just, and I don't think it's an age thing. I've met a lot of adolescents and kids that are worried about, all of these things that, that holds them back. But I guess you didn't have that kind of anxiety, so you were able to, naturally, you were able to take it day by day and not get yourself, because all that catastrophizing thoughts can really keep people stuck. So, yeah.
But you mentioned, you also didn't mention anger, and I didn't pick up anger at all in your book. 6 people in the car, not counting whoever was in the other car, however many people were in the other car. Of the 6 people in your car, 1 didn't make it. I believe it was a boyfriend or a friend of yours. The other 4, everybody was hurt, but the other 4, I guess, didn't end up in a wheelchair. And so never a moment of anger. Why did I end up with a wheelchair and not them? Never felt that.
I don't think I did. And some of that could be, there were 2 people that had traumatic brain injuries from the accident, and I watched them struggle. And I think that, just even in like the first few days after our accident, I was in the room next door to one of my friends who had a very, very severe brain injury, and they wheeled her in on a wheelchair to come and see me. And I barely recognized her because her gaze was just so blank, and she was snapping. She couldn't talk. She couldn't do anything. She had to relearn pretty much how to do everything. And so I think from that moment, like, I wasn't about to say, well, I'm the only one in a wheelchair. I could recognize that early on, that I had my brain, and that was really important.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay. So, have you had the opportunity, or are you asked to speak to other groups of people that are disabled and are trying to figure out how to cope in their lives?
I have sometimes. I think it's a really tricky mentorship, because everybody that has a disability has a different experience. And you could put two people with the same exact spinal cord injuries next to each other, and the way that they move, the way that they struggle, the complications they have, the issues that they have are all going to be really different. And so I think that I've had connections with people that are wheelchair users or disabled, and I've acted as a mentor for some of them, but not in a official capacity, because I think that it's really hard, and I think that you have to be really open to things. I will tell you that I work at my kids' elementary school, and there's one other wheelchair user. This year's her first year, and she's a second grader. She's 7. And she came into school today with a brand new wheelchair, and she was so excited to show me. It was like the cutest thing. I talk to her every day at lunch just to kind of like say hello to her. And so we don't know each other that well, but she was very excited to show off her new wheelchair. And then she also was really excited to point out that mine has duct tape on it. So I thought that was pretty cute.
That's hilarious. Okay. All right. I could see that. So I get that it's that type of mentorship is difficult, but let's go back to able-bodied people and addressing you, others addressing you. Can we ask about your injury? If I saw somebody in a wheelchair, can I ask about the injury? Do I have to develop a relationship first? What's the etiquette here?
I mean, for me, absolutely. I've grown to recognize that people are curious, and questions are a way to help people not assume anything about you. But I think it always is going to come down to the way that you deliver that. I mean, I've had people stop me in the grocery store and like, oh my gosh, what happened? And I'm literally thinking that I'm like bleeding from the face or something, because I'm not even understanding their shock. And so I think that, as you said, like, develop a relationship with them first. And that doesn't have to be like you need to know like their, maiden name and home address and birthday, but like just, establish a hello, how's it going today? Oh, the weather's great. Oh, hey, I noticed your wheelchair. And I think that is, for me, at least, again, I can only speak for myself, I think that would be completely appropriate.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you a couple of really quick questions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote in your book, I'd like to quote you. Okay. Having the will to accept those circumstances and moments that guide you, whether intentionally or otherwise, holds a secret that can propel you further than ever imagined. What does that mean?
I think just ultimately realizing who you are for what you are and what you aren't is really the key for you to be able to continue to move forward, to be your best self. I think that's why we're all here anyway, isn't it? We all want to be our best selves with our best lives. Otherwise, like, what is it worth?
Okay. All right. The second question that I wanted to ask is that if you look at those vulnerabilities, those strengths, you've been able to accomplish just a tremendous amount. Obviously, you're a mom. Many people would consider that an accomplishment in and of itself. Your children, at least in the press, are well adjusted. You feel them very well, but but that you don't pick anything negative up in that regard. You have a husband that seems to be the light of your life. You're an accomplished teacher. You've swam in swim meets both before and after the accident. But is there something that you haven't told us about yourself in that regard? Is there some inner strength, some spirituality, some other aspect of yourself that you haven't shared very much of?
I don't know about that, but I was thinking you were gonna ask me about something really negative about myself, and this is not necessarily that, but one thing that I think has I wouldn't say negatively affected me, but affected me because of my accident and because of the life that I've chosen to live. I do not sit still at all. Well, I am constantly moving. I have to keep doing things. And I've recognized that, especially as I've been a mom and had more jobs than I knew I would have. And I actually had at one point, I don't know if I think it was like a chiropractor or something that told me that my body got stuck in the sympathetic nervous system when my accident happened. And that is why I just can't seem to slow down. And so I think that there is some truth to that. And I think about that quite often because it is absolutely true. I don't know what downtime is. And if I even tried, I wouldn't be satisfied. And so I'm just like constantly on all the time, which is exhausting, but I don't know it any other way.
But I wonder if that also kind of helped you get moving, so to speak, right? And doing all these amazing accomplishments that you've done.
True. Yeah.
So, I mean, to be perfectly honest, the world is an able-centric world, right? If you're 6.5 feet tall, you can reach the top shelf of these impossibly high shelves in kitchens. If you're in a wheelchair, you may have trouble reaching the shelves in the kitchens. Are there things that we're not thinking about that would, because we're able-centric, that would help people that are not, that we should be incorporating into our lives, incorporating into our homes or our thought processes or what have you?
Gosh, that's a big question. Yes. In fact, yes. However, I think that actually I know this about me. I've been using a wheelchair for so long that even we moved into the house that we live in now like 7 years ago, and I didn't want to modify anything that we didn't have to because I had never had it before. And I had contractors ask, like, do you want our countertop in our kitchen lowered? And I didn't because I've never had that, and I wouldn't want to change what I already knew. And so I sort of have adjusted my life to an inaccessible world to make it my norm. And so I think that there are a million things that we could do to help a million different types of differences, but ultimately I don't know what that's going to look like. And I, in the meantime, have moved on from it, and I want the higher countertop because that's what I know, and that's how I know how to cook and how to stabilize myself on the drawer that I leave open when I'm trying to get stuff out. And I've kind of solved my own problems of inaccessibility, and so I for one am not good at recognizing things that are inaccessible in my life because I've always just learned to find a different way.
All right. Very good. I'd like you each to have the opportunity to kind of summarize, your thoughts around these particular topics and things that we've talked about. And Erika, I'm sure I'll end up asking you first, particularly as it relates to coping mechanisms and helping people through some of these, because not everybody is as resilient as perhaps Ryan is. And Ryan, I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about anything that we haven't spoken about, or about your new projects, new books that are about to come out.
Sure.
So Erika, why don't you go first? Tell us, how would you summarize, and what are you thinking in terms of being able to help other people?
Yeah, so first, Ryan, I just wanted to thank you for joining us today and sharing your amazing, inspiring story. Because I just found your strength just to be very inspiring. I'm sure you've heard that a lot before, but more so is just having such a life-altering experience and traumatic experience. When you were 16, you lost your boyfriend, and all this journey that you've come through. And I know, when I first met you, when we chatted the other day, just the first thing I felt or noticed about you was just you were just so radiant. You had all this positive, you're thriving and you're excited about life, and all the life adventures to come. So it's just, I think that's very inspiring for people to see if they're going through whatever hardships that they're going through, where they feel it's not going to be their turn, or their life is not going to be any better, so to speak. And so to summarize, I think a few things that I wanted to pull out that I find very what's it called, inspiring, or something that people can use and do some little takeaways is from your resilience, but also just that first thing I said earlier about you had that mind shift set of what, I can either choose to just exist and why me my way through the rest of my life, or I can choose to think about it differently, and what do I have control over? I have control over how to respond. And you decided to put your athlete mindset on, keep on going, right? There's that. And I also saw a couple things of you found your new sense of purpose, and also what's gonna your grounding, I guess you call it a grounding technique or something to help ground you. And that was always swimming for you, that it didn't look the same as it once did for you, but you learned how to work that in, and that was kind of you still kept that part of your identity, but in a different form. So
yeah. And I would just I guess I would say to your listeners, something that I have always thought about, and I still do every single day, is sort of your world is what you think it is. And if you look at your life or your experience and you think that it's good, then it's good. And if you look at something and you think that it's bad, then it actually is bad. And so it's really as simple as that. And just recognizing that in your day, that you have the power to decide how you feel about the thing, and then the thing is that. And so that's really what I wanted to share. Beyond that, I have a kid's book coming out in April. It's the same title of my memoir, which is pretty cool. And the publisher wanted me to stay very true to sort of offering sort of a glimpse into my memoir as a children's book. And it's already available for pre-order. It's really beautiful. The illustrator is amazing. And so I'm really excited to be able to share more of myself in that regard.
That's great. That's great. Maybe we'll be able to buy some for for some of our offices. That would be
that would be awesome.
Yeah, or we could have you back and say hi.
Before I close, I did want to say I thought your book was very easy read, very compelling. Definitely recommended.
Thank you.
And there were parts and pieces of it that that just resonated from other things. The story of you twisting around in your van looking for what smelled. I did the exact same thing in a van. So when I read your story of they're yeah, I did that. I mean, of course I had use of my legs, but I was twisting around what is that smell? Finally found it. And then the story of you jetting off to Paraguay of all places, and not necessarily the capital, but someplace that's 100 miles away from probably the largest city in Paraguay. Just seems like such a kid. I know you were a young adult, but such a kid thing to do. I completely understood.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of those stories in your book, so I very much recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
With that, let me say that our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services, an insurance-based provider whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC. With that, thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Erika.